welcome back to Our World. It's the summer of 1972, a time to read between the lines. For example, women bought aviator sunglasses to cover their eyes. They wore them with bathing suits that told you everything you wanted to know and no longer needed to ask. Being 18 still made you eligible for the draft and Vietnam, but finally it also made you eligible to vote for president. It was the summer Smokey Robinson and the Miracles spoke the truth when at their farewell concert they sang, "Just because you've become a young man now, there's still some things you don't understand now. My mama told me you better shop around." And so we did.
Go, girl. Shop around for some paperbacks to take to the beach. The Exorcist was very big that summer, and The Happy Hooker, The Godfather. You could zip through those while you were tanning on one side, and you didn't have to read between the lines to follow the stories. And what's a day at the beach without a record of it? The Polaroid SX70 was new that summer. Now you could see what you had wrought in 60 seconds. Laurence Olivier said so.
In minutes, you will have a finished photograph of such dazzling beauty that you will feel you're looking at the world for the first time. The new SX70 land camera from Polaroid.
I can't believe I ate that whole thing.
You ate it, Ralph.
The big commercial that summer was a whole lot more plebeian than Lord Olivier selling a camera.
Can't believe I ate that whole thing.
Take 2 Alka-Seltzer.
When we started developing the advertising, I started thinking back as a child to my experience with Alka-Seltzer.
Creative director Charlie Moss had lived with Alka-Seltzer all his life.
My mother was just an Alka-Seltzer freak. She thought Alka-Seltzer could practically cure anything. No matter what you had, she'd give you Alka-Seltzer. You know, you had a stomachache, get Alka-Seltzer. But I remember a cousin of mine had broken his leg, and I heard her talking on the phone and seriously suggesting to my aunt that he take some Alka-Seltzer. It would make him feel better.
Waiter says, "Try this, you'll like it. What's this? Try it, you'll like it. But what is try it, you'll like it?" So I tried it. Thought I was gonna die. Took 2 Alka-Seltzer.
This kind of advertising was probably the last of its type for a long while, because 72 was a transition year in the advertising business, and the mood of the country and the mood of really most clients, most advertisers, became rather somber. I mean, people just weren't in the mood for ha-ha.
It was a serious time. Women were on the march for economic equality, and their banner that summer was a brand new magazine called Ms.
We were going to change, or try to change, the landscape of publishing by hiring women.
Patricia Carbine published Ms. Magazine.
What we really wanted to do was get women into the pipeline that at that point led to or could lead at least, to the publisher's office.
Most of the traditional women's magazines at that point did not even have women editors, much less women publishers, ad salespeople, and so on.
Co-founder Gloria Steinem was an editor and lead bugler.
There was, and I'm afraid there still is, no other national magazine for women that is actually controlled by women. So we wanted to have a magazine that didn't argue about whether women were full human beings or not, but just assumed it and went on from there. We looked at a lot of different titles. Finally, we decided on Ms. because it just indicates female without marital status. We wanted Ms. to be a different kind of magazine because it was one that would help us really change our lives, not just how to make 101 kinds of hamburger, but also physically how to change our lives. And perhaps most of all, to be what it still is, which is a kind of portable friend for women. But I think we may have been skeptical about its survival since everybody was telling us it would never last, because you'll notice in the first issues there's too much to read. It's like we were trying to cram in everything because we thought each issue would be our last.
And from its very first episode in 1972, the TV show MASH featured a new kind of funny female, a funny female character with character.
I thought of Margaret Houlihan as a very strong and very vulnerable woman.
Those two, they're ruining this war for all of us.
Loretta Swit, Hot Lips Houlihan, Major Hot Lips Houlihan.
I thought of her as loving and caring. I tried to make her the best quote, damn nurse in Korea, which is what her aspiration was.
Excuse me.
There was this wonderful balance with her toughness and their jokes about that, and it was easy to be the brunt of the jokes then.
I'm sorry, honey, my dance card's all full.
Major Houlihan was a soldier, very proud of it.
Larry Gelbart was the writer who brought MASH to TV.
I felt she was already equal. I never associated liberation with niceness. I don't think, you know, one is equal when one is as nice as everybody else.
Nurse Cutler, report to my office.
Now?
Now.
Yes, sir. I mean, yes, ma'am.
Dismissed.
Well, at least she didn't have any trouble figuring out your sex.
My sex is none of your business.
I liked her being a bitch. I liked her being a tough guy. I felt she was liberated from day one. I think comedy allowed us to look at some of the darker aspects of war, no question.
Finest kind.
Just like Mother used to make.
You know, we gotta do it someday. Throw away all the guns and invite all the jokers from the north and the south in here to a cocktail party. Last man standing on his feet at the end wins the war.
It was intentional to have the show reverberate with what was going on in 1972. Obviously, most of the people connected with MASH didn't endorse America's participation in Vietnam, and we had a regular and enormously popular vehicle for expressing our opinions.
What are you doing after the war?
We knew that we were doing something we liked very much. We knew we were writing in or directing or acting in something we actually wanted to watch at the end of the week.
I remember the first day as though it were yesterday, how we laughed, how we talked. There was always a specialness, I think, about the group from the very beginning.
MASH, of course, used the Korean War to make a point about the Vietnam War. Vietnam made its own points vividly. Remember this picture? 9-year-old Kim Phuc running naked down a road near Saigon. A South Vietnamese plane had mistakenly dropped napalm on a half-dozen women and children. Kim Phuc survived. Come back to the 1972 Olympics, which 11 Israeli athletes did not survive.
Our world will continue with Between the Lines in the summer of '72.
Hello! Now that Ed has the hang of flying, this 4th of July we will be skywriting above the beaches and picnic places of America. So be sure to pick up a few bottles of the Bartles & James Original Premium Wine Cooler, or if you prefer, Ed's New Red. Uh-oh! So please keep your eye on the sky this 4th of July, and we thank you for your support.
When you use the AT&T Long Distance Network, you can enjoy a relaxing conversation.
Hello, Planet Chaos.
Over the last 3 years, AT&T has lowered prices 30%.
I hear you loud and clear.
Lower prices, another way we're reaching further to bring your world closer.
I'm so glad you called. You're the first Earth person I've talked to all day.
AT&T, the right choice.
Everyone knows the quality built into Japanese cars, but of all these manufacturers, only one was named #1, Nissan. Named in the J.D. Power 1987 New Car Survey as the #1 Japanese manufacturer in quality. Fewer headaches, fewer problems. So when you buy the Nissan name, you know you're buying quality. The quality cars of Nissan. Nothing takes the place of driving the best.
We make you feel like driving, and the name is Nissan.
The dramatic Michael Spinks Jerry Cooney heavyweight encounter plus the Tyson Thomas title bout. Who's the real champ? Decide for yourself tomorrow night on ABC Sports.
Welcome back to the summer of 1972. Pretend we're going on a trip. Before we get on the plane, though, we're going to have to go through this metal detector. They were still a new sight in airports, but between 1970 and this summer, there had been 76 attempted hijackings for money, for political reasons, and sometimes for madness' sake. And so they began to screen the passengers at airports. We found other places to carry our keys. And hijackers found other places to carry their guns. International terrorism was just beginning to make hostages of us all. How nice that there were still times when nations put aside politics to come together in peace. Wasn't that what the Olympics was all about? Okay, now pretend our flight was not hijacked and we've landed safely in Munich.
Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome.
In Cabaret, Joel Grey was the decadent ringmaster of a Germany that spawned Adolf Hitler.
There were a lot of people who would say, "Oh, you were so much fun. I just loved you. I loved your character," and really with blinders to the more menacing, serious aspects of that character.
Im cabaret, au cabaret, to cabaret.
I think one is very lucky when you can be involved in a piece, in the theater or in a movie, or if you write a book, that somehow illuminates the human spirit or illuminates the human condition and instructs people about the complexities of history and their life while still being entertained. It's the history repeating itself. A piece like Cabaret to remind everybody about what happened, what could happen, what could still happen. Guaranteed on another level, but we're not out of it.
That summer, Germany staged its first Olympic Games since the Nazi propaganda circus of 1936. The West Germans spent $650 million in an effort to erase that memory.
Willkommen, Olympische
Billy
Gäste.
Dauma headed the Munich organizing committee.
I think it was very good for Germany that the whole world could see after 40 years we have another Germany in the world.
In the first 10 days of the Olympics, the splendor of the athletes somehow survived an inordinate amount of politics and bungling and bad officiating. And there were two unforgettable achievements. One by the 17-year-old Soviet gymnast, Olga Korbut.
Watch this. Watch this. Back me right to the other bar.
Has that been done before by a girl?
Never. Not by any human that I know of. Look at that. And she's second best. I don't believe it.
This, then, is a historic performance you're watching right now in gymnastics.
She's Kathy Rigby's size. Oh, my... Wow!
Olga Korbut.
She just captivated the world. There's no question about it.
Rune Arledge, who was the president of ABC Sports, recalls the other superstar.
Mark Spitz was a little bit different. Mark so dominated his sport and was so mechanical in a sense. I mean, he's not a mechanical person, but his mastery was so mechanical that people, first of all, took him for granted, and secondly, almost resented, in a sense, that the domination that he had. No one had ever dominated a sport like that before.
Spitz already had won 3 gold medals and was going for 4 in this event.
And in first place, Mark Spitz, a new world record. Another gold medal for Mark Spitz.
Every time I accomplished 1 gold medal, it became much less weight or a burden on my shoulders that I could go ahead for the next event. And obviously, I looked towards the success from that day's accomplishments to achieve, you know, what I was trying to do for the following day. It took each day at a time, and it was, you know, became actually easier.
He has 5 right now. Here in lane number 8, it's John Murphy putting on a sprint. John Murphy coming hard in lane number 8. Murphy's after Spitz, so is Bourret. The winner is Mark Spitz. He's got 6. And Mark Spitz already opening up the lead on Fleckner.
In a final relay race, Spitz went for an unprecedented 7th gold medal and won it. From that glorious height, the Munich Olympics were about to plunge into an abyss of terror and death. An hour before dawn on September 5th, while the Olympic Village slept. 6 men dressed as athletes threw heavy bags over the fence and climbed after them. Inside the village, the men changed into scarves and hoods. One, the leader, put on a white beach hat. Their objective was building number 31 Connollystrasse, which housed the Israeli male athletes. There they were joined by 2 more intruders. Moshe Weinberg, the Israeli wrestling coach, was awake that morning and walking toward Building 31 when somebody jumped him. He fought back but was overpowered, taking a bullet in the jaw. At gunpoint, Weinberg led the intruders to the apartment where the wrestlers and weightlifters lived, hoping that the big men would be able to overcome the intruders. No luck. One intruder went upstairs and captured 4 Israelis. In one bedroom were Gad Tzopari, a wrestler and veteran of the 6-Day War, and the Israeli team's only American member, weightlifter David Berger, a native of Cleveland. Berger tried to bolt, but was subdued. The intruders decided to march all their hostages to apartment 1. Tzopari was at the front of the line. He did run for it and made it.
Suddenly, there was another terrorist in front of me with a stocking over his face, and by pointing his Kalashnikov, he signaled me to go into a small room. Just as I got close to the entrance, I shoved the Kalashnikov aside with force and ran out. I ran in zigzags while bullets were being fired at me.
Coach Weinberg jumped to cover Tzopari and was shot dead. Weightlifter Yosef Romano broke for the kitchen to get a knife. He too was shot to death. Now the hostages were in place. The siege was on, and the terrorists made their demands. Jim McKay of ABC Sports reported it all.
They've demanded the release of some 200 Arab guerrilla prisoners in Israel in exchange for the lives of Israeli athletes. They had set a deadline of noon, which is just an hour and 15 minutes ago, saying that they were going to kill all of their hostages at that time. That deadline obviously has passed. There has been no more action that we know of. There was, however, considerable activity among police just a few minutes ago. 4 officers appeared dressed in athletes' blue and red sweatsuits. They carried machine guns.
A policewoman, Annalisa Grace, negotiated all day with the terrorist leader.
He had realized that the life he was leading wasn't good, while his fellow countrymen were living in camps and had no land or country to go to, and that's why he decided to work for the Black September. They said you can't get sympathies from other people if you kill people. And he was saying there's no other way now. They've tried everything.
In Cleveland, David Berger's parents had invited friends over to watch the games.
There was a brief interruption of the news stating that the Israeli athletes were under capture. That was the first thing.
We didn't know who it was, but we saw the weightlifting coach interviewed on television, and then we were afraid.
Throughout the day, crowds gathered outside the Olympic Village, many to protest the fact that Olympic competition continued while the siege was on. Their protest was heeded.
The games of the 20th Olympiad have now been officially suspended. At 10 o'clock tomorrow morning in the huge Olympic Stadium, there will be a memorial service for the 2 men presumed to be dead.
Convinced now that the Israelis would not swap Arab prisoners for the hostage athletes, the terrorists demanded a plane and safe passage to Cairo for themselves and the hostages. The Germans agreed, but secretly they planned to have snipers in place at the airport. When the terrorists led the 9 hostages out of the building, the police were stunned to count 8 terrorists. They had prepared only 5 snipers. 2 helicopters took hostages and terrorists to the airport. Manfred Schreiber was chief of Munich police.
They got into the helicopter in such a way that we would also have to shoot the hostages at the same time, because one terrorist was always running together with one hostage.
At the airport, 5 police marksmen tried to do the impossible, kill 8 terrorists. They got 1. Another scrambled under a helicopter and began to shoot out the lights. Now it was too dangerous for the police to fire. There was a lull and a false report that the hostages were safe, a report heard in Cleveland by the Bergers.
We're certain that had he been free, we would have got a telephone call. And the hours went by, and we didn't hear. And then the news came on at 11 o'clock that, that they were under siege at the airport.
Suddenly, a terrorist threw a grenade into one of the helicopters. Indiscriminate shooting erupted. 5 Arabs and 1 policeman were killed. As for the Israelis,
There were 11 hostages. 2 were killed in their rooms yesterday morning. 9 were killed at the airport tonight. They're all gone.
President Nixon had called, and he asked if there was anything he could do personally. I said I would appreciate it if they could bring David home, and he did send an Army plane and crew, and they flew him back to Cleveland.
the other 10 bodies were flown to Israel. Munich's Olympics had become a tragic fiasco. Olympic President Avery Brundage didn't make it any better.
The games must go on. We declare today a day of mourning and will continue all the events one day later than originally scheduled.
What could be worse than having athletes murdered for political reasons? And all Olympics have had political problems, but nothing to approach this. And the idea that it would be treated as somehow an interruption of this spectacle and that we should get back to it as soon as possible, I think offended an awful lot of people. And I think the feeling was that it was unseemly.
The memorial service that had been proclaimed for 2 murdered Israelis now honored the memories of 11. The Black September terrorists had blackened that September for the whole world.
Two more facts, 2 more thoughts. Fact, tennis was the fastest growing sport that summer. Thought, tennis is not a team sport. Fact, The Godfather was the most popular movie that summer. Thought, it's about power through terrorism. Come back to the future of the summer of 1972.
I want reliable people, people that aren't going to be carried away. I mean, we're not murderers, in spite of what this undertaker says.
My next guest is an incredible guy, a rock singer, a surgeon, and one heck of a tuba player. And now he has a great tasting wine cooler. Please welcome Dewey Stevens! He's not here?
The unexpected taste of Dewey Stevens. 1/3 less calories, 2/3 more fun.
Dewey, come on now, you're ruining my show.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Let's step outside. Okay, now we agree that my Toyota's priced about the same as your Ford Ranger, right? Right. And we both have AM/FM cassettes, 5-speed sticks, and power brakes, right? Right. So what else does your Ranger have for about the same money? Okay. My Ranger also has power steering, power windows, and door locks. Really? Cast aluminum wheels, fuel-injected engine, interval wipers, and halogen headlights. All that extra on Ranger for about the same money as my Toyota? Yep. Still friends? Well, still brothers.
Get 3.9% financing or $1,000 cash back on 4x4 Ford Rangers.
Tonight on 2020, sexual harassment on the job.
I'll be out of your way in just a minute.
Don't hurry. I'm enjoying the view. Learn how far is too far on 2020 tonight.
Welcome back to the legacy of the summer of '72. Some of the truths that were hidden between the lines that summer would emerge later in bold-faced type. And in the case of Watergate, not very much later.
I, Richard Nixon, do solemnly swear.
Before President Nixon would fall, he was re-elected by the biggest electoral mandate since Franklin Roosevelt's in 1936. Nixon carried 49 states. In the Washington Post of September 29th, Woodward and Bernstein reported that former Attorney General John Mitchell had controlled a secret slush fund to finance dirty tricks against the Democrats. And so, the revelations that would lead 2 years later to the resignation of Richard Nixon were underway.
Thomas Eagleton survived not being a vice presidential candidate. He retired in 1987. He'd been a member of the United States Senate for 18 years. Otherwise, he seemed perfectly normal. Stevie Wonder's music and his fame grow more wondrous still. On tour, on records, on rock video. The Rolling Stones, after 25 years, may still be the best rock and roll band in the world.
After Munich, the Olympics became so security conscious that by 1984 in Los Angeles, there were 7,000 athletes and 19,000 security personnel. In Cleveland, there is a privately commissioned memorial to David Berger. There's a memorial plaque to all 11 murdered Israelis in Munich.
Well, so long.
See ya.
In 1983, 20 years after the end of the Korean War, 8 years after the end of Vietnam, MASH retired from the field. A little sad, a lot victorious.
Well, there it is the way it was in the summer of 1972. I covered the Republican convention in Miami Beach, took 2 of my daughters. Victoria, age 11, got heat exhaustion, too much sun. There was too much of a lot of things at that convention. Inside the hall, there was too much arrogance. Outside, there was outrage about too much war. And all over the country, there were too many voices trying to sell too much. It seemed that everybody was trying to eat the whole thing. And somebody had heisted the Alka-Seltzer.
The summer of 1972, it was the summer Grease opened and hair closed. Crosby, Stills, and Nash stopped playing with Young, Simon stopped playing with Garfunkel, and Dylan stopped playing. In Cleveland, an annual parade of black militants to honor those killed by police was canceled for lack of interest. Marching was being replaced by jogging. The best-selling book was I'm Okay, You're Okay. Maybe, if you read between the lines, the summer of 1972 was the summer the 1960s ended. And so it goes. Also in the summer of 1972,
Arthur Bremer was sentenced to 63 years in prison for shooting presidential candidate George Wallace.
the Supreme Court ruled the capital punishment as now administered was cruel and unusual punishment and therefore unconstitutional.
Tropical storm Agnes killed 134 people and caused severe flooding in 10 eastern states.
Fiddler on the Roof passed the play, Life with Father, as the longest-running Broadway show in history, then closed 2 weeks later.
Blues singer Jimmy Rushing, William T. Grant, the department store tycoon, William Hopalong Cassidy Boyd, and Oscar Levant died.
Actress Jane Fonda visited Hanoi. For a transcript of this broadcast, send $3 to Our World Transcripts, 2 John Street, New York, New York, 10038.
Fantasy becomes reality.
Why is this happening?
Passion turns into obsession. David Carradine, Richard Mulligan, and Angie Dickinson. Between love and hate is jealousy.
An ABC News Business Brief, now from New York. Sandra Van Oker.
Good evening. The Dow Jones Industrial set another record today. Analysts say declining interest rates spurred the rally. Ford and General Motors say they do what Chrysler does and test drive new cars before they're sold. But Ford and GM say they don't disconnect the odometers. American Motors will post a record profit for the second quarter. And for the first time in 8 years, it will pay executive bonuses. The money supply fell $1 billion in mid-June. Allegis has announced a major restructuring and will sell its non-airline holdings. F.W. Dodge says contracts for new construction dropped 6% last month, but public works construction was up. And the city of Cleveland today celebrated the end of its 7-year fiscal emergency. On New York financial markets, interest on T-bills rose, gold lost $3, and the dollar was higher. That's Business Brief. I'm Sandra Van Oker.